So what I want to talk to you about today is sexual misconduct within Zen communities. So I got a really good email from a patron. So I'm going to read this email in full, and then I'm going to try and answer this guy's questions as best I can. Ready? My number one question regarding Zen that I've always come back to for years is it worth it? You mentioned an issue at your monastery, and locally I had a chance to study with a Zen teacher, but his teacher was caught having affairs with multiple students. It's not hard to find more examples of this. The thought process for me goes something like, how is the practice valid if the masters who have practiced for decades and can track transmission directly back to the Buddha can't act properly? So for me, that's the fundamental question in this guy's email, and a very good one. He goes on to say, what hope do I have to find any sort of peace, wisdom, or compassion in my simple lay practice? I get a certain amount of peace from the practice, and my life feels better for having it. But I wonder if I'm just fooling myself. Anyway, I appreciate the honesty and candor you bring to this, and if you could point me in the right direction, I'd appreciate it. So I think it's a problem. I think teachers should not touch students, students should not touch teachers. It always, except for never, it always becomes a problem. There are so many issues, power dynamics, power issues, issues around students. It's usually female students and male teachers. Issues around the female students having sexual abuse in their history or dynamics with men in their history, and they're working closely with this teacher and they've surrendered their boundaries and they've opened their hearts and their minds to this person. And so many times I've seen situations where the teachers take advantage of the students, they can't help themselves, or they get confused by this open, beautiful dynamic in many ways. I mean, I've worked with students myself, and I know how precious that teacher-student dynamic is. Like, the person comes to you with an open heart. You feel like you could do anything with them, okay? And you can't, because it turns into a disaster. I'm making it clear where I stand on the issue because I want to go into this guy's questions with kind of some detail that I hope is helpful. So he asks, my thought process goes something like, how is the practice valid if the masters who have practiced for decades and can track transmission directly back to the Buddha can't act properly? So it's a really, really deep question. And I've been sitting here like for the last hour turning it over in my head. When your teacher lets you down, as your teacher always will sooner or later, it's an opportunity. Believe it or not. You have to step back and really start to ask yourself some serious questions about where you stand, what's true, what's important to yourself, what do you know, what have you experienced on the cushion through your practice, and can you commit to that? So when the teacher screws up, it throws you back on yourself. Zen practice is fundamentally difficult, and it's hierarchical. There's usually someone in the room with you, if you're practicing with a group, who is ready to jump on you if you start disobeying the rules. That person is the authority. That person usually gives private Dharma instruction of some kind to you. You're having a difficult time practicing. You see this authority figure. You look up to them. They're giving you teachings. Sometimes they're really profound teachings, right? But ultimately, that person is just a guide. They can't deliver you the practice. They cannot deliver you a spiritual experience. They cannot take you to the Dharmic Satori promised land. All they can do is point and guide and instruct. So when the teacher messes up and shows their humanity, like I said, you're thrust back upon yourself. This is my experience. And you really have to go deep into yourself. It's a questioning moment. And you have to ask, why am I doing this? Why am I doing this? And if you have an answer like, I don't know why, and maybe there's something else, go do it, right? When we had sexual misconduct at my community, I have to be honest, my practice was weakened. It was weakened. And in many ways, maybe it's still weakened. But what I was able to keep is stronger than ever, because I had to look at the heart and core of Zen practice. I had to look at the Four Noble Truths. I had to look at the essence of what my teacher was teaching, right? I had to look at the essence of the Buddhist principle of anatta, or no self. And I had to say, okay, Roshi did a lot of stuff that's so heartbreakingly wrong, not okay. Does that fact negate this fundamental core principle of no self, which you've investigated on the cushion, or around which you've had experiences of no self on the cushion? Does Roshi's behavior negate the change that your practice has had in your life? How it's enabled you in really bad moments, man, to get out of bed in the morning, to spit in the face of your own nihilism and walk out onto the street, do your shopping, do your job, interact with people in a way that is true and helpful and courageous and beautiful and spiritual, all those things. Does Roshi's bad behavior negate that, right? So questions I had to ask myself. And then I had to go deeper, because here we get into something really fundamental. Roshi was like my grandfather. And he was, I don't know, I get images of him in my head now. He was such a beautiful man. He was so wonderful. I loved him. I learned unconditional love through him. So when he did this bad behavior, when it came to light, I took it really personally. And it's been a long process, but I have had to look at myself, and I have had to say to myself, you need to grow up. You need to stand and walk in your own shoes. Like, we loved in my community looking up to this Zen master from Japan who had trained in like a Meiji era Kyoto monastery with no running water, who had this reputation of being totally fierce, who had this reputation of being the teacher's teacher. There was always a story about how Roshi dissed Ram Dass, right? Or he said something that made Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche think twice, right? I really got a lot of my identity as a priest under Roshi from Roshi. And I had to stop when his reputation just kamikazed into the earth during his scandal. And I had to ask myself, are you ready to grow up now? Are you ready to walk in your own shoes? Are you ready to take this practice on yourself and not just seek affirmation from Roshi, affirmation from your teacher? Like, are you ready to fully wear the practice, wear the robes yourself, without needing Roshi or even the tradition of Zen Buddhism to back you up. So I want to reread one of this guy's questions. He says, what hope do I have to find any sort of peace, wisdom, or compassion in my simple lay practice? So we had a really big hierarchy, strong hierarchy in my Zen community, and Roshi was at the very top. And I know what this guy's saying. He's saying, I'm a guy. I'm living in the world. I have my simple lay practice. And one thing I have learned as I have had to process the sex scandal in my community over the years is that there is no such thing as a simple lay practice. There's no such thing as a small life. Like, there's no such thing as a little ordinary person who has a smaller practice than the great Zen master. Bullshit. And I mean that. Bullshit. Bullshit, bullshit, bullshit. Okay? Like, your practice is you-sized. You know? You're walking down the street, you turn around, and somebody punches you in the face. Your pain is no less than if Roshi gets punched in the face, if the Dalai Lama gets punched in the face. Your suffering is no less. Your death will be no less a death. Your birth was no less a birth. So there's no such thing as a lay practice. And this idea that develops insidiously in these strongly hierarchical spiritual communities, that some people are sort of higher up than others, it needs to be, you need to challenge that and question that and have faith in your life and have faith in the practice that you have faith in your mind or your true self or your Buddha nature, which is exactly the same as the great Zen masters. There's no difference, okay? What matters is your practice. The teacher can help you access your practice. That's why they're so special and so precious. But never is the teacher not human, a fundamentally different being than you. That's a little bit of a controversial opinion because in a lot of spiritual communities, they really do believe that the teacher is a different kind of being. And you know what? I don't know. Maybe they are. Maybe they are Buddhas, but it really doesn't matter. You have to take your life, your simple lay life, as you put it, dead seriously, no matter what your life is. Like Huang Po, the great Zen Buddhist patriarch, right? He was in a kitchen in China for 6 years in the monastery, the lowest job at that monastery, just washing rice, picking cockroaches out of the corners, scrubbing the monastery toilet, cooking food for people, composting rotten vegetables. That's Huang Po, one of the greatest Zen masters ever in the tradition, okay? There's no such thing as a simple lay life. So until you can take your practice dead seriously, and that means taking your life dead seriously, you're going to sort of put the teacher up on a pedestal, and then your heart's going to be broken, and your practice is going to be threatened, if not destroyed, when the teacher falls off that pedestal, as they inevitably will, because anyone who's put up on a pedestal is going to get knocked down sooner or later. So finally, I want to put some questions out there, and they're questions that have been kind of helpful for me. Maybe it's not the Zen master's job to be good, okay? I remember a monk telling me, he was very schooled in Taoism and a lot of Chinese spiritual practices and culture and traditions, and he told me, hey man, in China there's a different model, okay? In the Chan system, back in the day in China, there was a different model for spiritual practice. And it was the master and the apprentice model. And it was never the master's job to model good behavior. So the master usually had kind of a coterie of teachers that the master had trained. And it was kind of the teacher's job or the senior student's job to let the new students know what was the deal. Like, okay, look, this guy is kind of wild. He's kind of crazy. He may do this. He may do that. If this happens, come and tell me. They would kind of warm the student up. They would educate the student. They would unpack what the master had did. But the master was kind of a wild card. Okay, so we have a lot of cultural suppositions in the West that we bring to our Zen masters. And I'm sorry to have to say it, but we're competitive. We want to get on the teacher's good side. We push our peers out of the way. We want to climb to the top. We want the master to affirm us. And a lot of times I think this allows misperceptions to arise. We expect the teacher to be perfect. We expect the teacher to be a bastion of morality and good behavior and to vote progressively and to be pro this and anti that and to have all the answers. Well, they don't. Maybe their job is to manifest zero, to push boundaries sometimes. Now, I am not saying you should let a teacher touch you. Your teacher touches you. The first thing you should do, in my opinion, is publicly out that teacher as quickly as possible. If there's no problem with it, if the touching is Buddha activity, then everything will turn out okay. So that's not what I'm saying. But I remember when I went to the monastery, one of the first things a monk said to me was, this is not a safe place. This is not a place that's going to affirm you. It's going to get very difficult. Roshi is going to find 1,001 different ways a day to push your buttons, to challenge your ego, to reflect yourself back to you, and to try and help you to manifest zero. He said, but you better take this practice seriously. If you're holding on to things, if you're playing around, if you got little ego games going on, if you're here to affirm yourself, you want some good writing material, or you want to be a spiritual guru or a little mini guru, or you really like the romantic idea of a monk, you're going to be like Caine in Kung Fu, snatching the pebble out of the master's hand, you're going to run into problems. That's what he told me. So it's really worth pausing and contemplating what your expectations of a Zen teacher or a Zen master are. When you go to a Zen teacher, maybe you need to already know what you think is good and what you think is bad. Because maybe it's not the teacher's job to tell you. It may be the teacher's job to go deeper into the situation that we find ourselves in, deeper than notions of right and wrong. I mean, I remember at one time a monk told me, Zen ain't about good and bad or right and wrong. It's about where good and bad and right and wrong come from. And his point was, you need to be strong and clear when you work with a teacher. He told me, Zen is not for people who have deep psychological wounds and issues that they're trying to resolve through Zen practice. He said those people need to be taken care of in a different way. Therapy, psychology, something else. He said Zen is for healthy people who want to push themselves beyond themselves, okay? Again, I am not saying that this excuses bad behavior, because it doesn't. But it's, in my opinion, it is important to remember that Zen, that for me to remember that when I started Zen practice, I knew what I was getting into. I knew it was going to be difficult. I knew that it was going to push me so far beyond myself, so far beyond what I thought I was capable. And it did that. It reduced me to nothing. It shaved my head. It took off my pretty clothes. It put me in stupid robes. It threw me in job after job after job that I thought I couldn't do, whether it was cooking in the kitchen or helping constipated students in the Zendo or acting as a stern disciplinarian in the Zendo. It put me in role after role after role, and it made me question what I thought of as my natural, inborn, innate innate character and self. And it made me think maybe I don't have a natural, inborn, innate character or self. But the way it brought me to this conclusion was by pushing me and pushing me and pushing me. And when you get pushed like that in a spiritual environment, it's hard to imagine certain people in certain lights not interpreting that as abuse. Again, if your teacher is touching you, call him or her out on it. That's BS in my opinion. That is abuse. So ultimately, one of the conclusions that I came to when I left that intense monastic environment, got out into the world, was that I mean, I have mixed emotions about it. I think if I hadn't been pushed to the extreme at the monastery, I think I would have gotten into trouble somewhere in the world. In a moment, I would have had too much to drink and I would have smashed my car, or I would have gotten in some horrifying relationship that was mutually abusive and destructive. Maybe I would have had a suicidal moment. I think I would have been pushed to the brink somehow in my real life if I hadn't found this intense monastic situation to throw myself into with all my heart and all my soul. But having come out of that situation, I was able to reflect on it and say, I wouldn't do it now. If somebody gave me the opportunity to do it again, I wouldn't do it. I did it, I experienced it, and it was profound, and it changed me, and I'm forever grateful for it, but that experience is behind me. And part of what is behind me in that experience is the sexual misconduct. Like, the sexual misconduct in our community is where I, within myself, had to draw a line and say, no matter what I think about how Roshi once hit a student, this male student told me about it, and he thought it was great that Roshi had hit him. He thought, because he was kind of a ditz, and he was like, it really woke me up. You know, no matter how I feel about that, which technically is physical abuse, or how I felt about monks sort of bullying each other and pushing each other. You know, I could see good and I could see bad in those instances, but when it came to the sexual misconduct, I had to say, no, there's something fundamentally off about this. And contemplating that situation, I had to come out of it and I had to say to myself, I can't go back. I can't unmonk myself. I can't take the things that I experienced that are fundamentally Zen Buddhist, the simplicity and clarity of the tradition, the wisdom and clarity of the principles of no self, the beauty and the simplicity of the Four Noble Truths. The fact that meditation practice works. I can't throw any of these things out, right? So I have to take what works within the tradition and that I have verified within my own experience, and I have to keep moving forward no matter how badly my teacher behaved. I have to move forward within my own practice, because if I don't, I'm going to get stuck in the quicksand of blame and regret and anger at my teacher or resentment at the people who exposed his behavior and essentially brought our community down. I'm going to feel insecurity with myself. Like, you really have to get clear on why you started practicing, on what you experienced that's fundamental and true as you practice. Contemplate what the essence of Buddhism is, what the essence of Zen is, what the essence of your practice is, and then continue with that moving forward. Make the practice your own and move forward. Or have the sort of the guts to say, you know what, I need to step back and take a time out. Maybe this isn't for me. I mean, I had to do that. I went to Peru. I did a big time ayahuasca journey there, not what a Zen priest or a Zen monk is supposed to do. I threw myself into that. It was extremely difficult. I was vomiting everywhere. I was in the Amazon. Well, what am I doing here? You know, a 6-7 day ayahuasca journey there. I had to try some new stuff. after I left the community after our sex scandal. You know, I had to pull back and step out of it. But gradually, as the years have gone on, I've returned to my practice. And now I've made it more my own than it was before. So I hope that's some kind of an answer to your question. I've got a little bit of a fever, unfortunately. Maybe I've got the COVID, I'm not sure. So sometimes I go a little bit, I have a script or some ideas. I didn't have that this time, so I apologize if it's a bit of a rant. Blame it on the fever. I'm going to include a link here, and it's also going to be in my description of ways that you can support this channel, PayPal or Patreon. I really appreciate it. I offer these teachings for free, but they take a lot of time, effort, and energy, and your support is really appreciated. It kind of like feels reciprocal, and that allows me to dig in and continue to help share what I've learned in my practice with you, because I feel like there are people out there appreciating it and wanting more and supporting me while I try and do this. So thank you. And you know, I'd appreciate you leaving some of your own thoughts in the comments below about this. And if you could hit the like button and hit subscribe too, that would be great, because the little algorithm elves in YouTube, they see that and they say, let's promote this video. This guy's got attention. Let's give him more. And that way we can get these videos out there. Goodbye.